Welcome back to another podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. Today, we're going to be doing an honest review of Flatiron. So like usual, I brought on 3 guests, 3 graduates. We're going to dive into their stories and get the real deal. So let's go ahead and start with our intros. Oscar, a few questions for you. When did you graduate? Where are you at in your job search? And what industry did you come from?
Yes, so a little bit about me, Don. First and foremost, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I graduated Flatiron at the end of September 2021. Just in February, I recently accepted my job offer to be a solutions engineer as well. And I previously came from a sales background as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you. How about you, Ren?
I graduated in July of last year, and I just finished up last week a 3-month apprenticeship with a consultancy. And so now I'm looking for a job again. I wanted kind of that bridge between the code school and a regular job. So mission accomplished on that. And that's where I am now.
Okay, cool. How about you, Rick?
Hi, thanks again so much for having me, Don. I'm really happy to be here. I graduated back in May of 2021, and I accepted my job offer in October of last year. So I'm a few months into working for a company that's based out of New Jersey. That's sort of the technical side of a bigger company that does executive talent search. And I came from as being a musician for many years and the better part of the last decade working on cruise ships as a music manager and band leader.
Okay. I'm meeting more developers that used to be musicians.
Seems like there's a lot of crossover on those skill sets.
There might be. What position did you say you had?
Oh, I am right now a software developer 1 or junior developer.
Okay. All right, cool. Let's dive into things. So, like I said, we're going to talk over each other a little bit, usually normalizes out. But why? So when you were doing your coding bootcamp research initially, why did you choose Flatiron over all other coding bootcamps?
That question for me?
All of you, whoever wants to answer.
I can start off. I pretty much started my whole research through a program called Career Karma, Don. So was in that program. I believe it was a 21-day stretch where you had to apply to various boot camps. I also attended some local boot camps in my area as well. I'm here in the Midwest in Columbus, Ohio. So I actually got to sit down with some local boot camps in my area. But what really drew me to Flatiron was the recommendation of Career Karma, first and foremost, and then just seeing a lot of alumni have success with Flatiron on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. So that's one of the reasons why I chose Flatiron.
Okay.
I heard about Flatiron through some media reports that were very favorable. I also read through a lot of course report about a lot of different schools, and I was looking for something, especially that would have the money back guarantee. And ultimately, I decided to go with Flatiron, even though my original plan was to go into iOS development. But I also needed to have a school that had remote instruction. They didn't have, at least at that time, an iOS program. So that's why I switched over to web development, going to Flatiron.
All right.
My circumstances were a little bit unique in the way that I was not in the United States when I decided to start looking for a boot camp. I was actually in Central Europe with my wife, where we spent most of the time during the pandemic. So a big part of what I was looking for in a boot camp was the number of hours that I would actually have to dedicate to being in class. And that's where Flatiron actually came out on top. Same as Oscar, I started with Career Karma and started looking through a lot of different programs and saw a lot of these that sort of had, almost like full school day sort of schedules where I would be in class for 8 hours. Now that would be normal, like on the East Coast, but where I was, it was, I would be up until 3, 4 a.m. every night, kind of being with the cohort. So I had sort of decided that I wanted to do a full-fledged boot camp, and I wasn't able to look at boot camps in Europe because I would have had to actually look for work in those countries. So Flatiron came up as obviously a US boot camp, and it only had really 1 hour of like stand-up class time, per day, which ended up at like 4 p.m. for me. So it's kind of a strange thing to pick as the top factor, but that really was one of the deciding factors for me. Probably the most important one was just scheduling. But
that makes sense.
Everything else, I liked the stack that was offered, and I read a lot of really great reviews about it. So things just fell into place.
Okay. Why would you have had to look for employment in Europe if you went to a coding boot camp in Europe?
These were stipulations actually on those schools. I looked at several schools in Hungary where I was, and there's actually like a coding camp in Budapest, which is in English, and it was much more affordable. But part of the stipulations of applying is that you would spend 1 year in Hungary looking for coding work in Hungary. And I didn't have any sort of work authorization to be able to search for work there. So I was sort of knocked out of that running right from the beginning. Same thing with different boot camps in England or, other European boot camps that were in English that were even, more affordable, but most of them said, you're not going to be able to look for work in the US if you study at this boot camp. So I needed to look for one based in the US.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Let's jump into it. So let's keep it open-ended initially, but what do you think about the program?
I really enjoyed my experience. People seemed friendly. I felt like I got good instruction. It was a very diverse student body. Overall, it was a very good experience for me. And I feel like I have a good outcome. I think that it prepared me well for the apprenticeship, working in the consultancy.
Okay. Remind me again, when you went into it, did you want to become an iOS developer?
Well, when I was first looking at doing a career change into coding, my first thought was iOS, but I hadn't really done a lot on that on my own. I had taken some Udemy courses, but hadn't gotten very far into it. So it wasn't like I had invested a lot in iOS. That was just my initial idea.
Were you trying to become a software engineer then, after that initial idea?
Yeah, I was really just exploring, and even before I applied to Flatiron, I was taking the bootcamp prep that Flatiron was offering, and so that kind of gave me a feel for it, and I felt comfortable going into web development. And I never want to be pigeon-toed as a developer. I want to have options open, and I'm sure my career is going to cover a lot of different areas.
Okay. All right. What do you guys think of the program?
I thought it was okay at first. So I originally started out with the part-time online portion of the software engineering bootcamp at Flatiron. So pretty much my schedule was, holding a full-time job, and then at nights I would turn on the switch to be Oscar the developer pretty much. And that schedule was a little bit brutal for me, to be quite honest. I wish I would have, now that the process is over, definitely one of the hardest things I've done. But I would say I wish they would have prepared us for the amount of hours that we're going to have to put in. Ultimately, I had to switch over to self-paced just to, manage my responsibilities at home and then complete the course. Overall, I thought the tech stack was very relevant, except for, at least when I took the course, it was first Ruby, just diving into Ruby. And then there was a portion with Sinatra. Really haven't even touched Sinatra since that module. And then it was SQL, JavaScript, and then React. I believe now the curriculum has changed where they flip that to where it's React now, so they get introduced to that. React is very complex. I don't know if it's appropriate to start them off with the framework if they don't know the fundamentals of JavaScript, to be quite honest. But I just wish they would have touched on JavaScript a little bit more and just take out the Sinatra module all in all. But I would say overall, the instructors were really great. Some of them I found that they recently graduated from Flatiron too, which kind of drew a couple of red flags on my experience as well. And just my going through the program, I really wish I would have done a in-person bootcamp as well, just because you're immersed in that environment for 8 hours. Unfortunately, I didn't have the luxury to do that. I only had, that hour of screen time with my instructor. And, they were really flexible with the office hours that they had to accommodate, but, I was working a full-time job as well. So it was a little bit, I would consider myself a self-taught developer at this point, to be quite honest with you. But that was just my experience overall with the course at Flatiron.
Yeah. No one ever learns Sinatra and thinks, man, I really am glad I learned Sinatra. I am really glad they put this in the curriculum. And I often get I've had instructors in the past, I wonder if it was Flatiron because it was a while ago, but I've had instructors say I hated teaching it, we should have replaced it with something else. And I'm not saying Flatiron instructors specifically, but right. Usually you just never use it afterwards and you can replace it with something else. And if they're diving into React very quickly, a lot of developers that came to my meetup that were really struggling with React dove into React too quickly. They didn't understand JavaScript fundamentals. That's huge. You really need those fundamentals down. And I would argue, right. I would actually argue 70%, I'm just pulling this out of my butt right now. 70% of developers, I think, dive into React that aren't ready for it. It's a high percentage. It's a really high percentage. So that can be frustrating. But I do want to ask, so your instructors, they had no real world experience. They just graduated and then were hired as instructors or TAs?
Some of them were. So the way the part-time layout worked, for the first two modules, I had a dedicated instructor. However, he was hired to be a on-campus instructor. So he went and enhanced his career. He was also a Flatiron grad, about 3 years of experience since he graduated from the school. I really liked his teaching style. He could walk us through the solutions, and he's been through the fire, more or less. But the new instructor came about midway through the program when we were at the JavaScript module, and she was only a couple of months from the time that she graduated the program, actually. So this was her first cohort, her first time teaching. So it was really a learning experience for a lot of us, to be honest. And you got a lot of complaints from the rest of the core inmates and saying, "Oh, I paid X amount of money, and I'm being pretty much taught by a peer of mine, more or less, with no real experience." So that was a little bit frustrating. But at least from my experience and reaching out to some other alumni, the instructors really make your experience. There's some good ones. There's some other instructors where I'm pretty much everybody on the call can say, you know what, I just don't learn well from this person, just because I feel like teaching is an important skill to have. Once you learn code, you're not going to be able to, teach it to an individual who is a little bit greener than you. So I wish they would have had a TA, or just put those instructors as TAs first before they were, in charge of our cohort, more or less. So that was what I had to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I can empathize with that. Like you said, instructors are huge. They make or break your experience at a coding bootcamp. Let me ask you guys this. Did you guys get a discount for doing remote versus in person?
Not that I know of.
Not that I know of. I actually ended up doing the ISA, which I immediately regret. That's definitely another conversation we can have. But I ended up doing the ISA with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't even look at the prices for the immersive program, because even though I would have liked to do that, I was in a very similar position that I was working full time the whole time that I was going through Flatiron. So I just looked at that.
Fair enough. Okay. We'll touch on the ISA, but Rick, how was your experience?
Sure. My experience was overall favorable. And to kind of piggyback off of what Oscar was saying, I think that's a pretty accurate assessment of, there's a lot of instructors. And to be honest, I'm not sure exactly how much representation there is from real world developer work outside of the Flatiron bubble. So it's certainly something to consider. My cohort lead, I really got along well with. I felt like he was, I really liked his personality. I liked his teaching style, and he had a handle on the material. But I believe he was a graduate, and I think about 4 years. I think right now he's been with the company about 4 years. So he got hired right out of the program and right into probably being a coach and then eventually a cohort lead. And he's worked with the company a lot. But I think the real value of the program to me was found in spots that wasn't necessarily the classes and the coursework. The coursework itself, the way that you work through it, it felt like it was sort of self-paced no matter what you did. You really never got graded on the labs that you would spend time on, and the times that we spent in class and in actually meeting with the cohort, we would sort of go through one of the labs where I was dedicating literally all my time. I wasn't working. So I was very lucky that my wife was working and kind of supporting the household at the time. And I was able to dedicate literally 100% of my time to just studying. I was very lucky to be able to have that. And I don't think I would have been as successful in the program if I didn't have that opportunity. So thank you to my wife. But so I really felt like I would finish a lab and even feel like maybe I found a clever solution to it to get the test to pass, but I never really got any day-to-day sort of feedback on my work. And we would maybe go through some stuff and I kind of felt like I was learning, but I sort of felt like I was learning on my own, and then kind of coming to class and then going over a little bit of that, whether or not I had some trouble with certain parts of it. And really, at least when I was in the program, you didn't necessarily have to do any of the labs. That wasn't even part of your final grade. The only thing that was really graded was your project at the end of each unit. And even going to class itself you didn't really feel like you had to go if you didn't really feel like you needed it. It was there and available, but it certainly wasn't necessary. And if you just didn't show up, it wasn't like you weren't going to pass the program. So I think that's kind of level of traditional school engagement I would have, liked a little bit more of, where I kind of still felt like I was just working on my own, but paying a whole bunch of money to do that.
Yeah.
At the same time, the real value at the end of the program, the things that I think contributed most to my career and the things that I really felt like I paid for was having 5 really solid projects that show this is what I can do, where I had been studying for maybe, 6 to 8 months before that, but I hadn't really created anything concrete that was like a final with a splash page deployed to Heroku, ready to go, ready to demo to somebody. So the fact that you end this program with 5 really great production level projects, you get quote unquote production level as much as you can get through as a student, was a huge value that I don't think I would have had sort of the discipline to get through without that program sort of in place to make that happen. And the second huge value, I think, was in the career coaching, which came after graduating. The career coach was like one of my favorite people in the world. I actually found out that he ran the career development department at the college that I went to, which was Berklee College of Music in Boston. And actually, he was there for 25 years, I think, and while I was a student there as well. So he helped me as a musician when I, in the early 2000s when I was graduating college, and helped me again as a developer later on in life. But we met weekly. He really worked on my behavioral interview skills. He really worked on looking at my resume and getting that cleaned up and ready to go out. And also just to have somebody that was really 100% focused on me every week, and talking about the kind of things that recruiters are looking for, and the kind of thing, like from sort of an insider standpoint. That was really information that I wouldn't have been able to get anywhere else. The coding skills, you can make that happen anywhere. It was great to have that. But I think a huge value is I think it's 6 months of dedicated career support and like interview support that you get after the program.
Yeah, I would like to echo that myself. My career coach is just incredible. He has decades of experience in HR, and really helped me to get my resume together. My interview skills, all of that, and also the partnerships that Flatiron has with companies. The particular agency that I did my apprenticeship with, I had never heard of them, but I just got an email from the school saying, such and such company took a look at your resume and they want to interview you. And I was just blown away and managed to get it. And actually, we had 3 people who were apprentices at the same time. One was self-taught. One was university educated in computer science. And then there was me coming out of a boot camp. And, I feel like our skills were fairly comparable between the different branches, but just to have that exposure through the school was really valuable to me.
Ron, you have a podcast voice. Has anyone ever told you that?
Thank you. I get that I have a radio voice a lot. In fact, I almost went into radio. I used to do that in college.
Interesting.
So maybe one of these days.
Yeah, maybe one day. So overall, it sounds like the career coaching was definitely a big highlight of the program. And that's a pretty important piece, right? And Oscar, I see you shaking your head as well. I feel like, so like you said, Rick, you can learn all this stuff. Like you guys are describing all this to me. It sounds like, quite frankly, if we're just looking at the curriculum and even take out the career coaching, it sounds like a very overpriced self-paced course that you could probably get cheaper anywhere else. That's what it sounds like, because you guys were surprised at how self-paced it kind of became. I even had a DM about someone, she just shared kind of an experience, but again, it was very, very self-paced, kind of on your own, echoed some of the lack of reviews of your actual code. So it feels like, actually, so first of all, my keyboard is broken for my Mac. Usually I'm looking up tons of stuff. I just have a few tabs open right now, but what is the price of Flatiron? I forgot it.
I took out a loan. The tuition price was, I think, right around $15,000. And with the loan, with interest, I end up paying around $19,000 over 3 years.
Okay. That's
it's not, a pocket change.
No.
That is, I pretty much piggyback off that comment as well. That's pretty much what is my situation as well. I would say though, when individuals go into that decision of going into a boot camp, I would pretty much just, you go into a boot camp because you want structure, right? There's a ton of free resources out there, free code camp, Scrimba, etc. You can learn these frameworks or languages that Flatiron taught you and more. But, I feel like what I paid for was a career coaching, and to get me to that next level in my career. And also what Ron had mentioned, the employment partnerships were a huge plus. To be honest, I feel like Flatiron is one of the only coding boot camps that offer that. Most of the folks that I've talked to, at least in my area, that graduated from a boot camp, they had no support at all, post graduation. So Whenever individuals are considering boot camps, I would just really consider, what does a career coaching look like, and what does it look like post graduation at the end of the day?
Yeah, usually what I hear with coding boot camps, sometimes you get like hiring days. Sometimes they advertise that they're partnered with people in the local area, with companies in the local area, and then usually coding boot camps fall short of that. It sounds like Flatiron hasn't. It sounds like a pretty good part of Flatiron, and it sounds like they have to actively work on their partnerships with the local companies. I think that's what coding bootcamp should do, especially around the 15,000, because like I can tell you right now with the self-paced program, that's a very, very, very overpriced self-paced program. So they're really making it up with the career coaching, and that's it's not a bad thing. That's a pretty good thing. Even sounds, I've had some students tell me that it's almost all going to like self-paced, where the live lectures are optional. Have you heard anything about that?
I think Rick had mentioned that before, and during his experience, there's no attendance that's taken at all. So if you miss a lecture, there's YouTube recordings where you can go ahead and watch these videos. Now, after being in the boot camp, it definitely taught me a different way to learn, right? Coming out of a university, I was taught a specific way how to learn, and learning how to code is definitely, a 360 on that as well. So I know if I could go back, I would probably recommend to do a in-person coding bootcamp, just so you can really immerse yourself with your cohort members, create that camaraderie. Your instructors one-on-one, they know your tendencies, how frustrating it is, because to be honest, no one really talks about just the mental strength that you need to finish a boot camp. A lot of times you hear boot camp members saying, hey, I didn't complete it because of XYZ reason. It is tough, to be honest. Everyone has their own responsibilities in life, and it's not easy. So I just always stress to folks when they ask me about Flatiron, my experience is really just to understand what you're going to go through, even if you do sign up for part-time. But I just feel like you're going to get the most bang for your buck if you do an in-person cohort, just because I feel like the most positive experience that I've seen from any boot camp come from an in-person session or cohort.
I think most people would agree.
One of the suggestions that I raised a number of times as I was going through was that it would be good to have kind of more socially oriented groups, for students to get to know each other. I entered the program probably a lot earlier than my other panelists, and was going very part-time, working at night for most of the time. And so I kind of took my time going through the program, and that's not an option anymore. But when I first started, they had a thing called Woeful Wednesdays, where people would just commiserate and kind of build each other up, the kind of that mental it was kind of like a support group for the students, and I really enjoyed that. And actually, we also had a group of students that we formed our own group for a while, which is one of the things that is mentioned occasionally, is that form your own study groups. You don't have to wait for the ones that the school makes, and that was a big boost. And I'm still in contact with some of those people, and they've opened up some opportunities for me.
When I sort of look back at the curriculum and think about, what kind of maybe smaller steps really could have made the program a lot better, I look back at the social aspect hugely. In fact, I think from some of the videos that I've seen on LinkedIn and other students, I think they've actually made some progress towards this. But when I took the survey at the end of each module, I would always say, we need more group projects. We need more time to work with other developers. That was, one of the big things that I typically am the kind of student that'll sort of bite off more than I can chew and sort of kill myself to get a project done, but sort of be like, oh, I have 2 weeks. I'm going to create a whole team management system like Twilio or any of these that are used to sort of manage projects and manage a team. And I'm going to do that in 2 weeks. Well, obviously I came out with something at the end, but it's like, okay, I'm going to reinvent the wheel to do this. But I look back on it and I say, what if I had a team of 5 and one person could really focus on getting the Rails backend killing and all the endpoints really, really doing great. And, another working on the front end and someone doing graphic work and and Flatiron has lots of different schools also in different departments too. Like if they put together a team of a lot of different disciplines, like you would get projects coming out on the other end of that would just be amazing. And that really wouldn't take that much effort. But I actually did see a Sinatra project just recently where it was presented by a student and the teammate. So it was like a group project, at least between 2 students. And when I was there, at least back last year, there wasn't any kind of projects like that. There were group projects, and I really wish there were. I guess maybe there's some value in having a project that's just completely you, but at the same time, I think you would have had a lot more really resume boosting projects that are, full, demoable projects that were made by a group and you could show off the part that you worked on. That would have really been significant. But I think Flatiron is sort of moving in the right direction on that front. At least I hope so. Because that's something that in my day-to-day work, I wish, and Oscar, you were mentioning about like Sinatra. I sort of get why they do that, why they sort of pick technologies. Sinatra is kind of precursor to Rails. So it sort of gives you, I don't know if it's quote unquote like easier to get your head around. I mean, it probably would have made more sense just to go straight into Rails because that is truly applicable knowledge that you're going to use in many workspaces that are still around. They say Rails is a dying language, but I ended up at a Rails house and I use Rails literally every day. That's my job.
Nice.
So I got very lucky that I learned Rails kind of at the bootcamp. However, Sinatra is weird. I get that, but you kind of had to learn how to learn that sort of outdated, maybe less sophisticated program. And that I think that ability to be able to learn these different packages comes in, more often than not to be really useful. In my day-to-day, for example, the front end is all built in React, but a lot of the code is 6-7 years old, like even like pre-hooks or like just started to show up. So there's technologies that are these weird outdated technologies like Recompose that kind of works like Redux. And a lot of it is sort of a masterclass in like over engineering. And would any bootcamp ever teach Recompose? No. It's not a technology that you would ever teach brand new students. But when I dive into the front end, I've got to figure out what's going on with this sort of maze of code that I don't really know anything about. And then I need to kind of pull out those other skills. And it's good that I know React and JavaScript, but you need to be able to learn. And that's sort of what the bootcamp does. It's not necessarily teaching you this technology and this technology that's going to be useful every single day, but learning how to work in weird technologies and learn very complex code bases written with packages and technologies that you don't necessarily know is a skill that I think every developer needs to flex and practice on.
Yeah. Real quick, because there's a lot to expand on with that. So, and then Ron, I'll let you get to your comment, but just before I forget, actually, let me just ask this question. So you mentioned, do you feel like Coding Bootcamp should teach Redux? Or that they do?
I Redux, honestly, when we got to Redux, that was kind of the moment that I was like, wow, this is wild. Like you really have to like sit back. And that's when I really, took advantage of office hours with my cohort lead and really had my mind blown several times about higher order components and how sort of Redux kind of mixes together and how it really works kind of on the back end, because I found that really fascinating. The work that I do every day also does use Redux. So that knowledge did come in handy. And I think it's it's definitely one of those, I think, useful skills, if not just the process of learning it is useful, I think, to most developers. So
okay.
I think so. I think yes.
Okay. It's something that trips up a lot of people in coding bootcamps when they do teach it. Usually because, quite frankly, coding bootcamps sometimes dive into React too quickly. They're not even ready for Redux, and just wrapping your head around React in itself can be difficult. But so I think you did get lucky, Rick. Ruby is not taught in most coding bootcamps for a reason. It's not very marketable. There are jobs out there, 100%. There are jobs out there. And sometimes you can even get higher paying jobs. I would almost see Ruby as becoming more of like a specialist position than anything. And you can negotiate your salary quite high for specialist focused positions. But what do you think about the idea of taking Ruby out and focusing strictly on Node? Do you think you would be more or less marketable, or more or less prepared for your job search?
As far as the saturation in the market of Node jobs, I would say that like having a strong base in Node and SQL databases, really knowing your SQL and really knowing Node and JavaScript and React is probably, I think, a baseline place to start for any developer who's learning and starting to go that direction. I do think that is probably true, because there is a steadily declining Ruby positions out there, and it is, it's like being a COBOL developer. The fact of the matter is, if you know how to code in COBOL, you're never going to have to look for work. Mm-hmm. And those jobs are actually going to be, because you have these very old code bases, that are 20, 30 years old, that are written in this archaic language, and nobody codes in it anymore. So, learning a language like that, you'll have work. But yeah, as far as boot camps sort of churning out the most prepared, I think the market is more saturated with Node React jobs for backend. Yeah.
Okay. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think that, these days the JavaScript and Node, would really do you well. I was so glad that I got exposed to Redux as I was going through Flatiron, because that's what I used when I got to the apprenticeship. It was just invaluable that I didn't have to learn it all, right there. And actually, I'm hoping that they're also teaching React Toolkit now, because at least when I went through, they weren't teaching that. It's something that I picked up on my own on my final project, which just about killed me. I think that was the hardest part of the whole program for me. But I'm glad that I was exposed to that, because I was using both of those things, right out of my first real professional experience.
What do you?
By the way,
so does Flatiron have an apprenticeship program?
I'm not too sure as far as the apprenticeship program. I do know that once you graduate, the career services team will send you opportunities to become apprenticeships, with large companies, startups as well. So most of them are, I believe, just sent out to every graduate as well. So it's pretty much like first come, first serve. You're pretty much going to be competing with, your peers as well. So.
Okay. That's what I thought. It was like an external thing that they might be offering students. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we were talking earlier about a number of the instructors that people had being recent Flatiron grads themselves. And I was going through the LinkedIn of some people who went through with me as students. And I noted that a number of them are teaching in one capacity or another at Flatiron. So that's, kind of a continuing, internal jobs program that the Flatiron has for better or worse. Same here.
Yeah. That's the thing. And I've talked about this before. It's a lot of these students are going to a coding boot camp to become software engineers, to code professionally. And when you offer students that already now kind of like owe a debt to the coding boot camp or had to like really dig into their savings, you offer them money, an option, guaranteed employment, basically by hiring them as instructors or something like that. I hope that they pay those instructors well, because I know a lot of students, when they do graduate a coding boot camp, they can get a pretty high paying position, and sometimes it can come off as predatory, trying to scoop up like students that are just coming out, offer like lowballing them with an offer because you're not technically like a software engineer, you're a teacher. And this is like really true for TA positions as well. But I noticed that, and then they'll like include it as a statistic, as a success statistic, like they got the job, right? And so obviously that's completely dishonest and misleading. So I would be curious how many students they do recruit to become instructors. I would be curious why they choose previous students to do that, especially if they lack any software engineering experience, in the field experience. I'm just trying to think, because I feel like those students already have the culture down, and they already know the curriculum. Do you know if they have instructors maybe manage the website, actually push out features? Do you have like any internal platforms that maybe instructors might have contributed to? I don't expect you to know, but I'm just kind of curious.
Maybe the admissions page, to be honest, but I could be wrong. I do know that at least some of the instructors that I had communication with, they had talked to their career coach, and they were at the point of their job search where months had gone by, and they had their backs against the wall, right? You know, they had responsibilities. They had to, pay the bills. It's like, you know what, let me just go back to Flatiron and go from there. Still code, right? You're still coding, still working on your skills. And then eventually I would be able to move on to, that junior web developer position.
And that could be an option if they're not forced to pay back a big chunk of what they're making. And I wonder if they are. I don't know. Let me think more about that with the instructors. I kind of just want to sum things up. This is kind of the feeling I get from Flatiron. It sounds like the career services at the end, really good. Very supportive. Sounds like a really good thing. And honestly, a lot of coding boot camps lack that. A lot of coding boot camps drop the ball. Some will even say, you don't get a job within 6 months, we cut you off. You're on your own. It's like, wait, what? It's like you were responsible, like helping them actually break into the industry, and now you're just cutting them off. So that's a really important piece. And I'm happy that Flatiron has a quality program at the end. I do feel like, I don't think it's a good idea to teach Ruby. I don't think they're producing marketable students. I would be very curious why. Usually coding boot camps will do that because it's easier to learn. It's easier to learn programming concepts versus JavaScript, really messy language. I get it. I get why people hate it. To me, like, you learn to love it once you get good with it. But in the beginning, it's just like CSS. Like, both are very quirky things. They do things that you don't expect. And it's frustrating to learn coding diving into JavaScript first. So, but if you're already teaching Redux, Redux is kind of like, a lot of coding boot camps don't even teach Redux. They just dive into React. And Redux, I feel like you really have to make sure your JavaScript fundamentals are down to really understand it. It's tricky. I really think they'd benefit from focusing more on Node and JavaScript and really getting that down. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm taking just a little bit of insight on that point. I'm taking a kind of a stab in my own sort of assumptions here, but the founder, he might have been a co-founder. His name is Ari, I believe.
Avi?
Avi. That's
Avi Flambaum.
Yeah. And Avi Flambaum or Flambaum?
Flambaum.
So actually, the videos that are from him teaching the first couple cohorts of Flatiron School are absolutely stunning. And they're totally Ruby. You can tell that dude was a Ruby guru. He knew Rails inside and out. It was just his thing. I think it was more of a first language than English. The guy absolutely spoke Ruby, and he flew through, teaching the code. You could tell he had a real passion for teaching it also. There was an incredible amount of passion there. And I think the inception of the program came from that passion for Ruby. I think he started Flatiron School as strictly a Ruby school. And I think as the years continued on, he felt like they're to make the school more marketable, and would probably pressure from other executives in the school that pushed him to add more technologies, because you couldn't just teach Ruby. But I would be willing to bet that at the beginning that it was probably only a couple of units, and it was like Ruby, Sinatra, Rails, and then kick you out. Not kick you out, but get you out there and get you a job.
Off to the real world. Yeah.
But so I think that passion for Ruby was why Ruby was so ingrained. And they've probably, he decided to leave, I think, around 2020. And I think just a couple of months probably before I got there, to be honest.
That's an interesting history. I'm glad you mentioned that. That could explain, why it's still ingrained. But if he's gone, might be a serious consideration to replace it with something else. They probably have a lot of the data as they change the curriculum. I'm sure they pair with the measurement of like placement rates. But I'm just trying to think, like, just compared to a lot of other coding bootcamps, Flatiron, $15,000, it's expensive. It feels like with the curriculum, you're better off there are so many self-paced curriculums that you can learn outside of any coding bootcamp that are a little bit focused on purely marketable skills. I think the Node.js ecosystem is really good. So maybe, I don't know. I'm just trying to think, like, maybe the self-paced. So I don't like here are my thoughts. I don't like the direction they're moving with the self-paced. It feels like they're moving further and further away from what students like kind of crave and want. Like Oscar, you were mentioning, and I've heard this from other students, you were mentioning like in person. We want to be in person. We want to do other things with students. We want, even if it's like just hopping, like organizing events, like hopping on Among Us, just to connect students. Because when you have, like, you're paying this much, which can actually divide students, but that's another story. But when you have, when you're paying this amount of money to kind of just sit at home and not even like have a strong social program within the coding bootcamp to connect students and build group projects and step on each other's toes and figure out how to navigate through that and like just work with other developers, like those are huge skills that a lot of people, that's what they're paying for. That's part of what they're paying for, right? Like, I think all of us can agree, like these curriculums, you can find them for free online. You can even find structured curriculums. But like bringing more of that social aspect, I would love for them to build that up and build more of that into the program. But it sounds like they kind of are moving in that direction. So I'm pretty happy about that. I just don't think it's worth $15,000 yet. I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think I would have really, really liked to just have a little bit more of the social aspect. I mean, 2020 was a very strange year for everybody. And to be honest, my entire coding career has been through Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams. That's been a very interesting kind of like, I felt like I was with a number of these cohort mates that I would spend time with every day, but I didn't feel like I knew any of them. I didn't feel like I was generating any real networking or real friendships with, save one or two that we would sort of meet up and have little chats here and there. But it all felt very professional, sterile, I guess was a way to put it, where I didn't really feel like that those sort of friendships, deep friendships kind of building, kind of going through a tough process together, that sort of sense of camaraderie. Felt lacking. Now that might have certainly been my my downfall as well, of just finding it difficult to be social in that sort of environment. And learning to do that has obviously been a challenge for all of us through the last couple of years. But I think that was significant. I mean, I will say that Flatiron does put on some events that are totally optional. But after I graduated, I participated in a Flatiron sponsored hackathon. And I did work with a group of 5 people. And we basically had a weekend to put together to come up with an idea for an application. That the actual idea behind it was work together. And I'll tell you what, that weekend, I learned more about working on a shared repository, working with a group of people with differing ideas, reviewing others' code, working on a really intense deadline and needing to delegate different work to make sure that the project actually gets done on time and that the project is viable in the end. Like, that one weekend was more than any single unit from the entire actual coursework. And I think taught me skills, especially in the Git world, the shared repository world, that they don't even cover at all in the actual program.
They don't go over Git?
Barely. I mean, you submit. You submit your work, and you pass tests that they've written. So there is some sort of test suite integration there, and you learn you don't really learn RSpec, but you have to pass RSpec tests. I think that's another big shortcoming in the program, is they don't teach you any kind of test writing, which for me, I mean, when I work on a project, I'll write 3 lines of code, and then I have to write 200 lines of tests to cover the 3 lines of code. So I think that would have been really important. But those are the things that every developer needs to use and needs to know. You can say what you want about Sinatra, you can say what you want about Ruby or Rails, but if you're not really covering what's a rebase, how do I cherry pick comments? If I've pushed what happens when someone else is contributing to the same branch, and how does that eventually get merged, and what's a development and a production, and all of this. Again, they teach you the syntax in the classroom, but a lot of that is stuff that you would learn anyway. But that if they taught that sort of thing, it would be much more applicable into real world situations. Things I do every day. I fight with Git more than anything.
Yeah, I echo everything you just said.
Yeah. Put that on module 1 for sure.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Well, and so, I'll say this really quickly because it's not really, I guess, part of the program, but I almost feel like you could dive into Git too early as well, where you don't really have context of why you're even committing anything, and until your projects start getting larger, until you start working with other teammates, it's definitely good to teach it fairly early in the program, but you could really incorporate Git more with group projects, and it sounds like people want those. And I didn't learn about cherry picking till 2 years into my career, Rick, and we didn't learn about it in the coding bootcamp, and sometimes things like that do kind of get rushed past. It's not prioritized, for better or worse, and it's really hard to prioritize a lot of this stuff. Okay, I feel like I have a good feel of it. I did want to ask one more question, Oscar. You had mentioned you regret the ISA. Why is that?
Well, I would say, and this is me looking back at the program and my situation overall. I really wish I would have just saved up the money and done a in-person boot camp and just pay for it up front, just because I'm ended up paying more with the ISA as well. And also, I didn't know this, but the 6 month money back guarantee, I was offered several positions before I took this role, and my career coach told me, "Oh, since you've had multiple offers, you now do not qualify for the money back guarantee program." So I had to really just, take that into consideration. So that it was really regretful. And the roles itself were sort of, you touched on them a little bit more, Don. Low paying. Hey, come into this program. We'll teach you, Python, PHP, a little bit of AWS, all of these other languages that weren't a part of Flatiron, and then we'll place you in a city without, my choice. So I appreciated the offer, but I feel like if other developers who were not in my shoes, they would just, take it and run with it and say, hey, I got my first web dev career, but I feel like that they're just leaving so much money on the table, and they're really just selling for a low salary at that point. So just a little FYI for folks who are in the program right now and don't know about that in the ISA. So that's something I wanted to mention on the podcast as well, just to get the word out.
Yeah. So if you're given, like if you're offered like $60,000 for a development position and you turn that down, I think you owe the coding bootcamp money. But if you have offers that are like 30,000, and they might not even be web development positions, and you turn it down, or you're going to have to move across the entire country, that's something that shouldn't trigger, that refund policy. You shouldn't be forced into something that's going to put you in a really uncomfortable financial situation, or, a non-coding position. So with the ISA, right. Do they have like a minimum salary requirement?
I think it was 40,000, and this goes into the statistics as well that they report. It could be any job. It could be, hey, I go back into my sales role, or I'm a recruiter or what have you. I don't have to do any coding. As long as I make above that salary, then I have to pay that money back.
Well, let me ask you this. So if you choose to go through an educational program and then you choose to go back to your old job, I think you owe that coding bootcamp money. Maybe some people disagree, but like, you still are getting taught something. They're still offering a service and you are accepting that service. But does that ISA trigger, or does a refund get voided if, for example, you're only receiving one offer for like a design position or a QA position? If you refuse to take that because you went to a coding bootcamp, does anything trigger where you start owing them a lot of money, or from that ISA, or you just don't get that refund?
I believe, and there was a ton of checkpoints that you had to do to even be considered for the money back guarantee program. I think there's a ton of bullet points too, so they did not make it easy for you. But I would say if it hits over that 40K mark, and then if it's anything that they had helped you with as well, that's also another key point. If it was through Flatiron, whether it's a part of their apprenticeship programs, etc., then if you refuse that offer, then you would be responsible for the ISA as well. But if you had received an offer that you solely pursued yourself, then that would not be the issue as well.
So if they bring that offer to you and it's an apprenticeship program, it might even pay very low, you're right. Screwed if you refuse that.
Right, because I feel like the career, at least gentleman on the call, my career coach told me, hey, just go in as many interviews as you can, right? Because you want to get that practice. I remember being super nervous for my first interview. And that was my recommendation from the career coach, just, hey, no matter what happens, go on this interview. You can go ahead and practice. So I feel like they were being a little bit dishonest with that, knowing, hey, if you get this offer, which, to be quite honest, I feel like they would offer anybody that graduated from Flatiron, then, you're not going to be liable, or you will be liable for this ISA. You do not meet the requirements for the money back guarantee at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, that feels kind of disgusting.
Yeah, I was a little bit pissed off to be honest, but at the end of the day, I just wish folks would do a little bit more research when it comes to the ISA. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of YouTube videos and programs out there that talk about what the ISA has done for developers. I still know some folks who are paying that off to this day. So it's definitely something that um, is a burden, and wish they would be a little bit more transparent as well in the beginning. At least maybe talk to an admissions coach, a person, say, hey, if you do decide to do this ISA program, here are some of the pros and cons, and give you all of the bullet points that you need to do in order to honor that money back guarantee at the end of the 6 months.
They don't even say that up front. They just let you read the legalese and figure that out.
Yeah. As far as whenever I signed up for my ISA, they pretty much sent me the documents. I looked over them and pretty much signed it from there. It was really that simple. It made it seem like, you trust in us will get you the education that you paid for. But, take this ISA, go ahead and complete this program, check out the statistics that back up this ISA as well, right? 97, I think it's 97 or 96% placement in they don't even say software engineer, they say tech role, right? So that's something that I think they've changed in the later years, but ultimately that's why I regret the ISA, to be quite honest with you.
It's, I think, probably a little bit foolish for even from the beginning to put any clout in the whole money back guarantee. They love to throw that out as a marketing ploy. They talk about the money back guarantee all the time. They call it MBG, like you read it. And when you're going through the agreement that you sign at the beginning, there's a lot of bullet points. As Oscar said, they make it an incredible amount of work as far as the blog posts that you need to write, one blog post per week about a technical, some technical knowledge or whatever you're working on at the time. Having time for X number of interviews and these, X number of meetings. And you have to be able to complete all of this sort of like post-curriculum work, post-graduation work. And there's even a clause that I found, which sort of like put the nail in the coffin for me, which basically says at the discretion of a career coach or the career department, at their discretion, if it was found that you didn't make a good faith effort to a job search in the tech world, then you're ineligible for the MBG. And it's totally open that can be anything. That's just planting weed in the car. Like that's any kind of probable cause. Like they can literally say anything they feel like to disqualify you from that if they feel like they don't want to pay that out. And to be fair, I don't know the actual statistic, but I think the number of people who have actually applied for that money back guarantee and qualified for it and actually got any money back is incredibly low. Like probably less than what I can count on my fingers.
Right. Right.
I just don't think it happens. You just write it off at the beginning. It's like, you're not getting any of that money back. Like you just, you are where you're at and you got to find the work because they'll throw it out, but you can tell from the beginning of the program, it's really important for them to attract more people into the program. And you had mentioned this earlier, Don, you hear it from boot camps all over the place. And I think Flatiron in a way is getting a little bit big for its britches on that aspect. When I started my first day of my cohort, there were like 55, 60 people in that first class, which made me think, okay, the bar for entry is relatively low. And I think people are sort of jumping into this program. Now, if you drop out of the program, at some point you are entitled to some of that money back. As you go, up to halfway, I think, through the program, you can get some of that money back. But the graduating class, by the end of that 6 months full time, was about 12 people.
Whoa.
So it's obvious to me that they care a little bit more about the wordage of getting people in the door and getting those agreements signed and getting people into that first class, that they make more money on that end than the actual attention you get kind of at graduation, which I had several experiences where I felt like their attention to me just like dove off a cliff. I was, for example, I was waiting to hear back if I passed my final project code review. And I wasn't told that I passed on the call with the instructor. And a week went by and I still hadn't heard. And I'm emailing him. I'm emailing career services, and I'm just getting nothing back. Like, they just forgot I existed. And I'm losing.
It wasn't just me then.
Yeah.
I had the same experience. I was going nuts.
It took a while. Exactly. It took a while. Very, very nerve-wracking. You're sweating bullets.
Absolutely.
And something that I always wanted to mention here, the admissions program, I know they give you prep work, but whenever I enrolled, I didn't even have to take anything. It was pretty much call with the admissions office. Hey, I'm part of Career Karma.
You like coding? You're
right.
in.
Yeah. You have a computer. Awesome. Here are some of the courses that you can get into. And then that's when they start mentioning that. I say, like, hey, you know what? Just jump in the program. It's basically free. Right. You don't have to worry about putting any money down. Here's this thing that we have. It's called the ISA. And then you go into that whole whirlwind there. But that's something that I wish coding boot camps just across the market really enforce, just having a higher quality admission rate, or just the ability to fairly judge the person who is applying for this boot camp. Because, we've all had careers before this, and being a career changer, it's, a 180, right? There's so many responsibilities that you have to consider. And I mentioned it earlier in the call as well. It took a stress, a lot of, of my mental health, to be quite honest with you. It wasn't easy. That's something that the career coach really helped me with as well. Just giving me that positivity. So big shout out to my career coach, but it's taxing at the end of the day. And I really hope for folks that watch this to really consider all these factors that we mentioned, right? Like Flatiron, it's not all, daisies, and the grass isn't always greener at the end of the day here. But that's just something I wanted to mention as well.
Usually at this point, I'll go off on a rant. I'm not going to do that this time. I feel like you summed it up very well. That I don't really have to dig into this. Okay, fine. I'll sum it up real quick. Like, first of all, I did have one question, but admissions, so they don't do any hard technical assessment to let you in.
I think previously, I think they actually had a much lower acceptance rate when I think they only had one or two locations, and it was only in-person programs. I read that the acceptance rate was much lower, like 30%, 25, 30%, something like that. Okay. Now with the online program, I can't really imagine who they would turn away if you're willing to sign those agreements. If you're willing to sign an ISA or willing to sign up alone, like, they'll take you.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That's scary. That's predatory. So it sounds like
education. That's you see it in every for-profit college. It's when that bottom line becomes more important than a really great educational program.
Yeah. That's unfortunate, and that has spread among many programs during the pandemic. And that's the thing. It's like the pandemic hit, and this is an opportunity, like big, great resignation. Everyone's changing careers. Everyone's rethinking what they want to do in life. And it's a huge opportunity to get a big chunk of students in the door. And, if you want to make more money, you lower that admissions rate. You just do. You get people to sign those ISAs, which they're going to make more off of what they charge if you didn't sign it. It sounds like they have a really hard list to meet each week to be able to, just adhere to all those conditions that they require. And that clause, Rick, that you mentioned, that's bullshit. There's no reason for a clause to be in there. Like, you want to make sure that the student is actually putting in a good faith effort, but you need to be more specific at what that looks like in the contract. That needs to be spelled out, not ambiguous, to give them the option to just, decide you're not meeting our requirements. You're not making a good faith effort in. So it feels, and with their focus on like really trying to make this like self-paced, probably trying to reduce the amount of live lectures. Maybe you're not, but if it's a big option, if it's a big convention to do all these self-paced classes, these pre-recorded classes, everything that they're doing shows me that they're just trying to make as much money as possible. That's what it seems like, and that's what it feels like. And then you'll get like career success. You'll get like instructors, career success that do want to genuinely help you, but that you have to take a look at like what the executives are doing and how they're trying to grow and scale that business, right? So you can get instructors, you can get career success that will try to help you along the way. But man, 60 people that signed up and only 12 graduated. That is purely for profit. That's gross. Like I'm not a huge fan of that at all. But the reason why I didn't even want to say anything about it, because I feel like I'm just constantly saying that about each coding bootcamp now. It's like each coding bootcamp continues to turn into just this profit-making machine. It's like it started out with, the founder had a passion for Ruby. He wanted to create a lot of Ruby developers. That's a story that he was probably, that inspired him to create a coding bootcamp and just create a whole bunch of software engineers. And that's really cool. And then it turns into something that's less focused on the quality of the education, more focused on making more money. So I don't know. I feel like I just ranted about this 1,000 times. If you want to hear like me go off the walls, just watch other coding bootcamp videos. But I guess just be aware of this and all these things that we brought up. Challenge admissions. If they start dodging your questions, if they if you have a question, if you're a good fit for it, like admissions should walk you through like the pros and the cons and consider your specific situation. Does it apply to Flatiron? They should be open up front and be willing to have that conversation. If they shy away from any of these questions and they push back or get defensive, like that should be a red flag in your eye, because Flatiron still could be a great fit for a lot of students, but go into it just aware of everything that you guys shared. So yeah, no, that was, I'm glad we touched on that last topic, but we are just about out of time. I think we touched on a lot of good material for this episode, but of course, if you're watching on YouTube, definitely let me know in the comments below what you thought of all this, but let's go ahead and jump into our outros. Oscar, if people want to reach out to you, where could they reach you?
Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm open to have any conversation, whether it's, with Flatiron, software development and tech, anything. Always willing to help anybody on their journey. But feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's Oscar Ore.
Sounds good. How about you, Ron?
Same with me. LinkedIn is really my base for getting in contact with me. Just my name, Ron Sala.
All right. How about you, Rick?
Yep, same here. I also have a portfolio at rickmoredev.com, so you can check that out. But yeah, I'm happy to always have conversations, and I live in Austin. I'm happy to meet my sort of local developer people here. So yeah, anybody that wants to reach out on LinkedIn, Rick Moore, you'll find me there.
All right. Sounds good. Well, like I said, stick around for a couple minutes, but Oscar, Ron, Rick, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you.